Ken, you guys did this last year down in the Meyerhoff, Symphony Orchestra, the whole thing with the crowd. So how cool was it to talk to all the former Ravens coming back in 2000?
It was magical. It was really great. You know, Coach Billick says in the beginning of this documentary that getting them together allowed them to revert to who they were back in 2000, and that's what you saw. We interviewed each of the stars individually, but when you put them together, a different type of personality comes out. It's a team personality that comes out. Ray became the leader again, and Coach Billick became the sort of what you call arrogant leader of the team again. And of course, Tony Saragusa becomes the ringleader again. And this event that we put on was such a great moment for the fans of Baltimore to be in person. And now anyone who missed it gets to relive it, plus all of the backstory of that team. And I think it's really enjoyable ride, not just for Ravens fans, but for anyone who loves that type of National Football League team.
Yeah. Well, kid, I was doing some research today because, I'm a big research guy like you, and I do a lot of my show and prep and all that stuff. And I'm a big New York Mets baseball fan, and I found a similarity between the Ravens and the Mets. This is Ravens' first ever postseason appearance in 2000. And the Mets didn't make it to the World Series until '69 when their first trip to the postseason. So it's pretty not similar, but two different sports. But it seems kind of weird that two franchises, they never made it to the postseason. They make it and they run right through the gauntlet to win the title.
Yeah, and really the '86 Mets just had a series on ESPN that reminds me of this show. Lots of huge, unbelievable characters that you're like, wow, I have to see what Lenny Dykstra says. Well, you need to see what Goose says. You need to see what Shannon says. They were 8-8 in 1999. They were a team that not a lot of people nationally knew about, only a couple years in existence. But when they hit the scene in 2000, they hit it hard. They hit it hard on the field, and they hit it hard off the field, personality-wise.
And it's fascinating. This is before Ed Reed, right? Was Ed Reed still on the team?
He was not.
So this is before Ed Reed. So it's funny.
It sort of informs those future teams. I mean, you look at the future teams, the 2012 Ravens weren't all that dissimilar in that it was the defensive-led team, a quarterback who did the job right, did the job well, but wasn't the person that, led the team out of the tunnel, where that was Ray, just as it was in 2000. That attitude that was created in 2000 by the Baltimore Ravens that year is still the identity of the Baltimore Ravens in many ways.
That's true. And you've been doing a lot of NFL films. You just did you do a lot of them like the two Bills, and then you did one I put on my show to let you come on. The one about Al Davis. How cool was that to do with something about the Oakland Raiders? How the Raiders were like the NFL didn't like them. It was like out to get them. How cool was it to go talk to people who knew Al Davis and and listen to all the stories?
All of these have something different. When it was the two Bills, it was I can't believe Parcells and Belichick are going to sit down together with all their history and sometimes negative history. And with Al Davis, it was really, a lot of people forget that the Raiders were the most dominant team in football, certainly the most dominant brand in football. When you said Raiders, you knew what the Raiders were, and that was because of one person. That was Al Davis. And, it was a team that had the sort of swagger that the Ravens in 2000 had. And I think it's kind of funny that they met in the championship game in this 2000 film. And there's a great story with Al Davis, who almost signed Tony Saragusa a couple of years earlier. And, Goose could have been the difference, probably was the difference in knocking out Rich Gannon. And here he could have been a Raider. And so that's a great story that Tony tells. All of these stories have something different. And this one is, to me, all about personality, all about reliving an NFL that doesn't exist anymore, on the field and off, like I said.
Yeah. And it's also cool to hear the stories behind it. And you could like if you're a big fan of the Ravens or a big fan of the Mets or the Raiders, you go, really? Like, I like speaking of, like, you were talking about the '86 Mets, and hearing the story about Ray Knight, getting beamed by Todd Niedenfuter, and he goes, and you just hear Todd Niedenfuter, "Come on, big boy, let's go." And I met Ray Knight years, when I was growing, doing this a long time ago, and I'm looking up to him, and I was like, and I asked him a question about Eric Davis. It's like, in '86, Eric Davis slid into third and started to fight with him at third base, and he goes, "Yeah, the kid never shut up." And I'm sitting there going, I'm like, this is cool, I'm like a kid from the from '80s. I loved the Mets when I was a kid growing up, and I'm like, I'm listening to like Ray Knight who's telling me the story. It's like,
I mean, that's why we tell these stories again, is because there's generations that don't know that story. There's generations that don't know about the Ravens. Anyone, I mean, I would argue under 35, they were under 12 years old when this team won the Super Bowl. The memories aren't that vivid. And there's so many stories. Coach Billick talking trash in the locker room, Tony Saragusa having an enema. I mean, all these things that are told in our film where you're like, I'm glad this is out there because it's such an entertaining story.
Yeah. And you got a question?
Yeah. I was looking at your biography on imdb.com, and you are the showrunner and lead creative producer for HBO's Hard Knocks. Tell us how you got the job of being on Hard Knocks, because if you're an NFL fan, you know the show, and one day you need to have the Carolina Panthers on there again.
We hope to have every team on there. That's for sure. Yeah. Listen, when I started at NFL Films, it was the summer of 2001, and the Ravens were featured on Hard Knocks, the very first Hard Knocks. And we use a lot of that footage in this film. And I wanted to be a part of it, but I was so green, I was so new that they were like, we don't need you. That's fine. Well, I made up my mind right then. This show is so incredible that I want to run this show one day. So, I was lucky enough to work my way up and did a lot of great films on a lot of work. And Steve Sable finally trusted me to run the show when it came back in 2007. And, I talk about how the Ravens informed who the Ravens are today. The Ravens inform what Hard Knocks is today. When you think about the success of Hard Knocks, Rex Ryan and Jeff Campbell and Billy O'Brien, all these coaches, they're in the mold of Brian Billick. The big stars like J.J. Watt, who've been on the show, they're in the mold of Ray Lewis. Chad Johnson, the big talker, well, he's in the mold of Shannon Sharp and Tony Saragusa. The reason I'm on Hard Knocks and have been so lucky to run it for 16 years now really goes back to my love for that Ravens team, the 2001 Ravens. And that show is built off the Ravens. I mean, the personalities and the conflict all come from that first season. And a lot of people forget how great that season was.
Yeah. And Ken, and also with this movie coming out on Saturday night on ESPN, the city of Baltimore lost their team in 1984, and I feel like the city was trying to find an identity because of the Orioles not doing so well, and they became more like a bully because of nobody was, nobody gives the Ravens any credit. I hear my girlfriend's parents, and my girlfriend's like, "Oh, we don't get the calls, and they don't like us, and it's all against the NFL." And I'm like, "What are you, the Raiders?" Come on, but it's like. But you probably went through the when you did this documentary. Did you go through the hard knocks of Baltimore City and see where things came back, came above? Because when this team showed up in '96, we didn't have any football here.
Yeah, it's funny how some teams take on the personality of their city. What a Pittsburgh Steelers football team is, and it's very much built off that 70s ethos, when the steel mills were being torn down. And a lot of teams have that. I'm not sure many have it more than the Ravens. I mean, the Ravens mentality that year was adopted from the city of Baltimore. There was an attitude that football hadn't been around for a while. There was an embracing of the outspokenness of that's right, we're here. Yeah, I mean, we have a bird on our shoulder, and, people didn't know about us, but they were willing to put themselves out there and say, don't sleep on us. And I think that's very much like the city. You know, they're not an elite city that tries to operate the football team through glamour and that sort of thing. It's very hard nosed. It's very working class, and it shows up on the football field. So that history, I think, was very important, not only to their foundation, to the Ravens, becoming a team, but also to them being able to win in 2000.
Yeah, and plus you had Ray Lewis, who came from the University of Miami, who basically my brother is a huge Miami Hurricane fan. He was still stuck on the 80s, no matter what. I still hear it all the time. And I'm and Jamie, Adam and I are both Seminole fans, and I just hear them talk. I'm like, whatever. You can't even win a big one since 2001, and we won one in 2013. But Ray Lewis brought that swagger, because they didn't really have that when they first came to Baltimore. Because when they hit 96 through when they picked up Ray Lewis, they got smacked around a lot about every team.
They did, and that year, the 2000 year, coming off what Ray went through over the summer and his very public trial and public controversy, the 2000 Ravens were sort of formed in the image of Ray Lewis. And in the film, it's very clear he took that image from the movie Gladiator. He watched it every day, and that's where coming out of the tunnel was sort of born from. Of, if you win the crowd, you can win. You win the crowd. That's the line he remembered from Gladiator, and I think that sort of fits what this team did. No one liked them. They were loudmouths. They talked too much, but they could back it up. And they did it in the arena in front of everyone. And Ray had that attitude of, everyone's watching. That's fine. I'm going to put on a show. I'm going to put on a domination that no one's ever seen. And that's what they did that year because of the movie, because of what Ray went through, because of the Miami background. Sort of everything came together to form the mentality that still exists. Yeah,
and I agree with you. And that's what, they molded, because Ray Lewis had that situation going on, and everybody was like, oh, he was guilty or not guilty. And I feel like this team stepped up and say, he's good. Because I remember the whole media day, Shannon Sharp was like, stop talking about it. Let it go. It's old, old news, and they were behind him. Even Brian Billick was like, enough. I'm done with it. And it's like, and that's great. You have your team sticking up for you and say, our leader had a situation. It's over with. Let's move on.
Yeah. And Coach Billick's admonishment of the Super Bowl media press conference is legendary. And it's in this film. It's incredible to hear a coach talk to the media that way. It's something that doesn't exist today. You have to remember that after this team came the 2001 Patriots and the very staid press conferences. There's no bulletin board material allowed. You don't talk and give a team a reason to dislike you. And you certainly don't go ahead and proclaim your greatness in front of the media. Coach Billick was not afraid of putting himself out there. He was a PR guy for the 49ers before he became a coach under Bill Walsh. And he had that sort of Walsh intellectual part of him, but he also had this confidence that he passed on to the rest of the team. He allowed this team to be who they were. You can't have Tony Siragusa and Shannon Sharp and Ray Lewis and all these guys and say, hey, keep it quiet. These guys aren't going to be like that. But he was able to handle them and say, hey, as long as you back it up, you say whatever you want. And that doesn't exist today. In the Twitterverse today, this team would get lambasted. They'd be the number one topic on every podcast that exists every day. I mean, you see the controversies that come up now, and it's just off a little comment, oh, Joe Burrow was smoking a cigar, and that's his thing. Oh, it becomes a big thing. This team would have lit the social media sphere on fire.
Yeah. And this is before what, Twitter and and Instagram, right? So if we had that back in 2000, oh my God.
You can only imagine.
Exactly. Yep. Well, Ken, it was a privilege having you on tonight. Thank you so much for coming on. It was great to hear from you. And if you want to tune in, folks, if you want to watch this, it's after after the Duke and North Carolina game, right, on Saturday night, right?
Pro Bowl Sunday. It's football, basketball, then back to football on ESPN, and it'll also be on ESPN Plus.
That's cool. And any cool projects you're working on coming up, or?
We're gonna start looking for our next Hard Knocks team. I'm not sure who that will be, but that's next on the list, is find out who we're gonna spend August with. And it's always a big undertaking, a big deal. Everyone cares about who's going to be on the show, which is still amazing to me. So stay tuned. We're gonna find a good team for August.
That's awesome.
Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, Bills. Hey.
Bills would be good. Like I said, one of these days we're gonna get every team.
Nice. Yes, and hopefully we can get you back on. We could talk about it. Yeah, maybe we could come back. You could come back and talk about it.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, Ken. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Thanks, Ken.
All right. That's Ken Rodgers, the Vice President and Senior Coordinator and Producer of NFL Films and Documentary Filmmaker. And you can watch that again. Bullies for Baltimore, 30 for 30 for all you Ravens fanatics who they didn't make it to the postseason, kind of failed out. February 5th at 8:30 on ESPN, and if you miss it, you can watch it on ESPN Plus. We're waiting for Anthony Simonson to join us. That's where we had to end a little couple up at 8:43 in the evening here, because we're trying to get him on before we log off here tonight. What else is going on here? Anything we need to know?
Chris, it's called. I think we should do our picks. Who we think is going to win the U.S. Open on Sunday?
Okay, let's do our picks. Waiting for Anthony Simonson to join us. Speaking of the United States Open, how's our good friend?
Scores are really good. Chris Barnes is still in the top. 10.